I have an urgent need to build out processes for remote workers to help them learn how we do things, as well as have a system that makes it easy for them to access. The biggest need is for us to hire a virtual paralegal who has no experience at all and build out the systems and processes so that they can become a full-fledged paralegal by following a well-defined process that we map out. I don't have the process mapped out yet, nor do I have an effective way for our current paralegals to document what they do or a place to store it. I would really appreciate your help. Okay, so the first thing is I'll give you the sort of high level, and then we'll get into some of the specific tactics. So the way that most people document processes, in my opinion, is done backwards, right? The typical way that processes are documented is that the person who knows the process shows somebody else how to do it in some form, and then they're like, okay, go do it. Now that form could be that, I sit down and I write down a checklist, or I record a screencast, which is rarely a good idea. In my opinion, if you cannot write out your process in the written form, maybe with some screenshots, there's a problem, and the process is not refined enough in that way. Also, the biggest issue with screencasts, especially if they're longer, and I have seen, I had a client once who had a 4-hour-long screencast of a project or a process. That's obviously very extreme. But even so, even if it's 20 minutes, you're not going to record a brand new video when you change one little minute thing in that process, and that video basically becomes obsolete effectively. So I'm really a big believer that you need to be able to write these processes down. So what typically people will do is they'll show somebody how to do the process. And again, it could be a screencast, it could be them writing it. They say, all right, now go do the process. And the issue there is that there are shortcuts and heuristics, is what they're called neurologically, in our heads, that we know how to do things because we've always done them, right? And I just saw this again, like I was mentioning earlier with someone yesterday. They wrote in a process, get added to the group email. And then they moved on. And I was like, well, how do they do that? Right? To you, that's obvious. You know who to talk to, but somebody coming in here doesn't. And it's like, create a new folder for this particular group. Like, what format would you like the folder to be named under? What's going to go in the folder, right? So a lot of those things get missed, but somebody who does this all the time, like, oh yeah, I have to make a new folder. So the process optimization system, which, yes, I know that's POS, is how I recommend you actually write processes out, which is backwards to what most people do. Or I guess they're backwards to what I do. So instead of saying, here's the process, now go do it, I'm going to say, let me show you how to do this. And you write the process. So you write the checklist out. And then that person should take that checklist, and ideally they go back, they go to somebody else, a third person who has not seen the process yet, and have them run through it. Spoiler alert, it will never work, ever. Not one time will that work as a process. But what's great is now you get to fix things at an extremely granular level. So what we'll typically see is, let's say it's a payroll process, right? So we get to step 2, and it says the person wrote down what they saw you do, and they're like, open the payroll document for this month. Person number 3 is like, where is the payroll document? Do I need a password to get in there? Right. So now you realize very quickly that you cannot refer to assets in a process in a relative manner. It has to be an absolute manner. So instead of saying the payroll document, it should be like, click this link to take you to the folder that has the most recent document, whatever it might be. Now we get down to step 5, and it says, once you're done with this step, click the big red button that says submit. And person 3 is like, I don't have a big red button. So now you look at that and you're like, oh, that's because you don't have the proper permissions. You're a guest and I'm an admin. Okay, so I have to make an correction for that. And then we get all the way down to the bottom of the process, and it says, once you're done with all of this, send this over to Roger in accounting. Now, if you ever want to make somebody irreplaceable, name them in a process. That'll work out really well. The problem is that the third party is like, I think there was a guy named Roger who worked here, but I think he quit like 2 months ago. Who do I give it to now? So just as we corrected that we have to make assets a absolute reference, people should be relative. So we need to reference roles. So instead of saying give it to Roger in accounting, we just say like give it to the account manager associated with this folder or this process, whatever, it might be in accounting. So it's a role instead. Now, if we do this and we go through this step by step, and sometimes this takes minutes, sometimes it could take weeks, honestly. I've done this for multi-hundred step processes for the banking industry before. But once we do this, now we get a process that we have shown doesn't just work at a secondary level, it actually works at a tertiary level, which in my mind means that you could take somebody now off the street, give them this process with no prior training, and I'll come back to that, and they could go through the process without any errors being made. So I mentioned training. When you do a process like this, you essentially eliminate training, because I would make the argument that the majority of training out there in many companies is there to compensate for poor process. Think about it. You have a retail situation where somebody's learning how to use another POS system, point of sale system. They're learning how to use it, and they're like, what happens if somebody comes in and they want to use a check? And the manager's like, that happens like once a month. If that happens, just come to me and I'll help you. It's like that's training to make up for a poor process, because you need to have a process for something like that, even if it happens once in a while. So you now are basically eliminating training. And if you write a process in that manner where you've essentially eliminated training, you're now creating one that is ripe for optimization, automation, and or eventually outsourcing. So you can completely get it off the plate, and the role of the person that was coming in for, now they hopefully can move up and do something better, because that process doesn't require that kind of a person anymore. So I'm not going to say that you can completely optimize, automate, and outsource paralegals, but you can certainly do a lot of it in terms of research, brief writing. I mentioned research, but I'm going to say that again. There's a lot of things, and I know this for a fact because I have worked with several law firms, that you can OAO when it comes to paralegals. So now, with all that, let me come back to your question. There's a number of tools that I would highly recommend checking out. So the first one is Scribe. It's scribehow.ai. Scribehow. And so what it does, which I really like, so it has a Chrome extension, browser extension, not just Chrome. And if it's a process that involves using the computer or using a web, you have to go on some website, you have to click on this, LexisNexis, whatever it might be. You can have Scribehow record you doing it, and then it will create an SOP from it, including having screenshots, descriptions, and then you click on this, and then you do that. And it's very, very good, and you can edit it really easily. That's one. The next one, so I've always been a really big fan of Process Street, but for employee onboarding and training, Trainual seems to do a better job, and it's a better user experience. So I would recommend Trainual. Now you can use the Scribe processes within Trainual, so you can make them in Scribe and bring them over to Trainual, and that's totally fine. But Trainual is also nice because you can help track people's progress through the training. And it's like almost like a learning management system in that way. So you can see where people are, especially if you're going to be doing this multiple times. You essentially can create a paralegal factory using something like Trainual. Now, last tool is something called Tetra, Tetra. I believe it might be .ai. And Tetra is a plugin for things like Slack or a couple other tools. And what it does is it's a bot that basically becomes access where you need it to the company knowledge base. So really basic example, you could be like, how do we handle filing cases in the District of Columbia? And Tetra can come on and be like, for filing cases in the District of Columbia, and it's pulling this from your knowledge base, which can include things that you got from Scribe and Trainual. We do XSS. It can also say like, I don't have an answer for that. Would you like to provide it? And it can not self completely, but it can essentially prompt you to build out the knowledge base so that it can answer those questions going forward. So between those different tools and between that and the approach of the process optimization system, you should be churning out paralegals in no time. All right, let's take a live question.